young mother walked up to his table and whispered, "May I have your leftovers, sir?" He never imagined that single question would change both of their lives forever. The evening breeze drifted gently through the moss-covered oaks along the Charleston riverbank, carrying with it the scent of sea salt and a faint trace of jasmine tea from Cafe Magnolia. In that soft, golden light, a middle-aged man sat quietly on the cafe's old wooden porch. Beside him, a half-finished plate of shrimp and grits and a glass of sweet tea half empty. Richard Bennett, 58, founder of the Bennett Group construction empire, had long been a symbol of success and Southern grit. But today, sitting beneath the fading glow over the Cooper River, he was no longer the powerful CEO everyone admired. He was simply a man who had lost the love of his life, Ellen, and was still learning how to live with evenings that held only one chair, one shadow, and memories that refused to fade. In front of him, the city carried on as usual, young people laughing along the street, a guitar playing softly from a nearby corner, and the buttery scent of baked pastries floating through the wind. Richard sat in silence, watching it all as though through a pane of glass, one that separated him from everything still alive and moving in the world beyond. 2 years had passed since Ellen's death, but the ache remained, quiet yet unyielding, like a small flame that had never gone out. Silent dinners, business trips are meant only to fill the void, and the antique watch on his wrist, the gift from their 25th anniversary, reminds him that time doesn't truly heal. It only teaches you how to carry your pain and keep walking. Richard sighed, his eyes following a flock of birds sweeping across the crimson sky. In a city that never stopped, he found his peace in stillness, watching the crowd rush by, couples holding hands, laughter flickering for a moment before fading away. Those ordinary things had become a rare kind of luxury to him now. Something money, power, or fame could never buy back. Connection. A soft wind rippled across the river's surface, scattering the reflection of the sunset. And somewhere deep inside him, a quiet emptiness stirred, one he couldn't quite name. A man can lose everything in a single day, he thought. But what's worse is living on without knowing what still makes life worth living. He reached out, adjusting his glass of tea, his brows narrowing slightly as his eyes settled on the unfinished plate before him. It wasn't that he wasn't hungry. It was that deep down, nothing seemed to have any flavor anymore. Then, just as the world seemed utterly still, a figure appeared at the far end of the red brick street, moving slowly, carefully, holding something close in her arms. And Richard had no idea that within minutes, a few simple words from that stranger would change his life forever. From the far end of the red brick street, a small figure appeared. She strolled, every step measured and careful, as if afraid that even her footsteps might wake the sleeping world around her. In her arms was a baby, wrapped in an old gray wool blanket. Tiny hands moved softly beneath the fabric, reaching for warmth from the mother's chest. The young woman looked barely past 20. Her light blonde hair was tied back in haste, her face marked with exhaustion, yet her eyes still held something. Not despair, but the faint shimmer of hope refusing to die. She stopped beside Cafe Magnolia, hesitating as she glanced around. The cafe's warm yellow light spilled across her fragile wrist, and in that fleeting moment, Richard saw something quietly haunting in her sorrow. No noise, no complaint, only the posture of someone who had suffered too long, yet still clung to the last thread of dignity she had left. She took a deep breath, then stepped toward his table. The distance between them was only a few paces, yet for her, it might have been the longest walk of her life. She stopped, her voice trembling but clear. "Excuse me, sir. I don't mean to bother you, but I noticed you haven't finished your meal. Would you mind if I had the rest?" The words were quiet, almost fragile, but in that stillness they carried the weight of a plea wrapped in shame and courage intertwined. Richard froze. In his lifetime he had been asked for money, for jobs, for chances, but never for someone to ask for his leftovers. Not because the food was worth anything, but because it carried something most people can't bear to give up: their pride. He looked up. Their eyes met for just a few seconds, but that moment was enough for him to see that she wasn't weak. Behind her thin, weary face, he saw the faint, steady light of a mother fighting to survive. Richard gently pulled out the chair across from him. "You don't need to eat anyone's leftovers," he said softly, his voice like a breeze. "If you don't mind, have a seat. Let's share dinner." Amber, that was her name as he would learn later, shook her head, lowering her eyes. "I don't want to disturb your evening, sir." "You're not disturbing me," Richard replied, smiling faintly. "In fact, you're making this evening one I'll actually remember." She hesitated for a moment, then slowly sat down, holding her baby close. Tiny fingers peeked out from the blanket, her daughter, little Ella, reaching into the air as if greeting the world. The golden light from the cafe wrapped around them: a wealthy widower, a worn-out young mother, and a fragile new life just beginning. 3 people. 3 lives that seemed to have nothing in common, yet were brought together by one simple question. "May I have your leftovers, sir?" Richard signaled to the waiter. His voice was calm, steady. "Bring me another plate of shrimp and grits, some toast, and a cup of hot tea, please. Oh, and a glass of warm water for the baby." Amber looked up, startled. "Sir, you don't have to. I didn't mean—" "I know you didn't," he interrupted gently, his eyes kind. "But if you'll allow me, let me treat you to dinner. Consider it sharing a small piece of the world that's still good." Amber bit her lip, tears glimmering in her eyes, though she quickly lowered her head to hide them. She nodded slightly, whispering, "Thank you. Truly." And under the flickering lights of the Riverside Cafe, an ordinary dinner began, one that would become a memory both of them would carry for the rest of their lives. The waiter brought out the food, and the scent of buttered garlic shrimp filled the warm air. Amber sat across from him, her hands never leaving the baby. She ate slowly, gently rocking her arm to keep little Ella asleep. Under the soft golden light, her face revealed the traces of many sleepless nights. Richard watched in silence. He didn't speak, nor did he show pity. He simply observed the tenderness in the way she cradled her child, as though even the faintest breeze might harm her. After a while, Amber looked up, her voice barely above a whisper, as if afraid to hear herself speak. "I don't usually do this, ask people for things. But today, I didn't have a choice." Richard nodded slightly, his gaze softening. "Sometimes courage isn't about fighting. It's about daring to speak when you feel weakest." Amber pressed her lips together. She took a deep breath, then began to tell her story. She had left her hometown in Kentucky 6 months ago, carrying her unborn child. The man she once trusted had vanished, leaving behind only arguments and bruises. She fled to Charleston and found work at a small seaside diner. But 2 weeks ago, the diner shut down without warning, and she lost her only source of income. "I'm staying at a women's shelter for now," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "But they only let you stay for a few weeks. They told me if I don't find a job, I'll have to leave by the end of the month." Richard sat quietly. He looked at the baby, peacefully asleep, her tiny hand twitching in a dream. "I have an interview tomorrow at the Harborview Hotel," she continued. "It's just for a housekeeping position, but I really hope they'll take me." He didn't respond right away, only nodded, his eyes thoughtful. And in that moment a faint memory rose within him, the younger version of himself, standing before a stranger, trembling as he asked for his very first job. He thought of Ellen, the woman who had believed in him when he had nothing, who had helped him build everything from nothing but faith and hard work. "You know," he said quietly, "Ellen, my wife, once told me something I've never forgotten. No one is truly poor as long as they still have kindness left to give." Amber looked at him. Something in her eyes softened, as if the walls around her heart were slowly coming down. "How long has she been gone?" she asked. 2 years now," he replied, a faint, wistful smile crossing his face. "Every day I still tell myself I can hear her voice somewhere. Maybe in moments like this." Outside, the sunset had faded. The first raindrops began to fall onto the wooden table, soft, rhythmic taps. Amber leaned down, wiping a drop of water from Ella's cheek with a napkin. Then she smiled, the first genuine smile of the evening. "She's a sweet one," Richard murmured. "Looks like she knows her mom's doing everything to keep her safe." "Sometimes I think she understands me better than the whole world does," Amber replied, her voice warmer now. "When I'm tired, she's quiet. When I'm scared, she holds my hand. It's like she's saying, 'We'll be okay, Mom.'" Richard looked at them, mother and child, and realized he hadn't seen anything so beautiful in a long time. Not wealth, not successful, but the quiet, unbreakable strength of love. The rain grew heavier. The waiter brought another cup of hot tea. Amber whispered a thank you, her small hands wrapping around the warm cup as if holding onto a fragile strand of hope. And in that moment, Richard understood. He had found what he'd been missing all these years. That feeling of connection, of truly seeing another human being, not through titles or status, but through the quiet courage in their heart. "Amber," he said softly, his voice steady, "sometimes the best thing we can do for someone is to believe they deserve a second chance." Amber looked up. Their eyes met. And in the reflection of the rain-lit glass, Richard knew this dinner wasn't just for a young mother. It was feeding something inside his own soul that had long been starving. Outside, the rain had softened, falling in gentle drops onto the cafe's wooden awning. The sound of it mixed with the scent of hot tea, creating a quiet, comforting stillness. Richard sat there, his eyes resting on the baby asleep in her mother's arms. A scene that, if Ellen were still alive, she would have smiled at and said, "You see, Richard, kindness always finds its way back home." He reached into the pocket of his coat and pulled out an old leather wallet. From it, he drew a white business card, its corners slightly creased from being there too long. He placed it gently on the table, turning it so that the embossed words faced Amber. "The Ellen Bennett Foundation for Families." Amber looked up surprised.
What is that, sir?
It's an opportunity, Richard said, his voice deep yet calm. Call this number tomorrow morning. Ask for Rachel Moore. She's our program director. They can help you. Temporary housing, childcare support, and a steady job. Amber blinked, staring at the card as though she didn't dare touch it.
I don't understand.
Why are you helping me? For what reason? Richard was silent for a moment, then smiled faintly. Because 30 years ago, a stranger once helped me when I had nothing. Back then, I was just a young man trying to make it through each day. He didn't just give me a job. He gave me belief. The belief that I was worthy of starting again. He looked straight at her, not with the eyes of a wealthy man looking down at someone in need, but with the eyes of someone who had once stood in that very same place, who knew the price of hope. His name was Mr. Kowalski, Richard said slowly. He used to tell me, success isn't just about what you achieve. It's about what you make possible for others. When I founded the organization in Ellen's name, I made myself a promise. If someone ever needed the same chance I once needed, I wouldn't turn away. Amber's hands trembled as she picked up the card. Tears fell onto the wooden table before she could wipe them away.
I don't know what to say, she whispered.
Don't say anything, Richard replied gently. Just promise me one thing.
What's that?
That tomorrow you'll call. That you'll let us help you start again. Amber nodded softly.
I promise. I'll call.
She looked at the card again, then placed baby Ella's tiny hand over it, as if letting her daughter touch a future she hadn't yet dared to believe in. Richard smiled. Inside, a familiar feeling stirred, not pride, but a quiet peace. It was the same feeling he used to have when Ellen was alive. Every time they helped a struggling family, she would take his hand and say, "We're not just saving them, Richard. We're saving the part of ourselves that's still human." He stood, slipping on his coat. "Amber, your interview tomorrow? It's at the Harborview Hotel, right?"
"Yes, at 10 a.m., she replied softly.
"Good. The man who runs that hotel, Mark Thompson, is a friend of mine. I'll give him a call tonight. Not to pull strings, but to make sure he sees what I see. A strong woman, and a mother with dignity." Amber's voice broke as tears filled her eyes.
"Thank you. Not just for dinner, but for seeing me."
Richard smiled, answering quietly, "Sometimes, truly seeing someone is the only way to save you both." Outside, the rain had stopped. The streetlights shimmered against the river, a silver trail beneath the moss-covered oaks. Richard watched as Amber and her baby walked away, their silhouettes fading down the quiet street. And inside him, something shifted. Not loud, not dramatic, but warm, like a small flame finally rekindled after a long, cold winter. The rain had stopped. The Charleston night sky was painted in a pale shade of blue, reflecting the golden glow of the riverside streets. Soft jazz drifted from the cafe across the road, mingling with the gentle rhythm of the waves, like the heartbeat of a city that had lived through countless seasons. Amber stood up, carefully adjusting the blanket around baby Ella. She felt a strange mix of confusion and warmth. For so long, the world had turned its back on her, and yet tonight, a stranger had looked at her as if she was someone worth believing in. Richard finished paying and walked out of the cafe beside her. They stood by the doorway, raindrops still dripping softly from the edge of the wooden awning. He looked at her and asked quietly, "Are you sure you'll be all right? Do you have someone picking you up?" Amber shook her head, a tired smile on her lips. "The shelter's just a few blocks away. I can walk. The rain's stopped anyway." "Good," Richard nodded. "And tomorrow, remember to bring that card. Rachel will be waiting for your call." Amber tightened her grip around the card. She knew she would never forget this evening, the night when a stranger had restored her faith with nothing more than a look and a few kind words. "Mr. Bennett," she said softly, her voice trembling, "I have nothing to give you in return." Richard smiled and interrupted her gently. "You don't owe me anything, Amber. Just promise me one thing, that someday, if you meet someone who needs help the way you did tonight, you'll do the same." She looked at him for a long moment, the streetlight reflected in her eyes like two tiny drops of shimmering water. "I promise," she whispered. "I'll do that." They said goodbye. Amber walked away, her steps slow but steady. She held her daughter close to her chest, humming softly, "We'll be okay, baby. We'll be okay." Richard stood there watching. Her slender figure faded behind the old brick buildings, leaving only the sound of the wind and the damp scent of the night. For the first time in years, his heart felt utterly calm. He turned and began walking toward his hotel. As he crossed the square, he stopped and took out his phone. The screen lit up with a familiar name. Mark Thompson, Harborview Hotel. He pressed the number and waited. "Mark, it's Richard. The young woman is coming in for a housekeeping interview tomorrow. Her name's Amber Collins. I just wanted to say, make sure they see what I saw in her tonight. A woman of strength and heart." A chuckle came through the line. "You saving the world again, Richard?" "No," he said softly. "Just giving back what someone once gave me." He ended the call and looked up at the night sky. A few stars glittered faintly, their light reflecting across the quiet river. He whispered, perhaps to himself, or perhaps to Ellen, "You were right, Elle. Kindness always finds its way back." And as Richard walked on beneath the glow of the streetlights shimmering over the wet pavement, he knew this night wasn't just the beginning of something new for Amber and her little girl. It was the beginning of something new for him too, after 2 long years of living in silence. A seed had been planted, small, simple, but capable of growing into hope. 6 months passed. Charleston had stepped into a new summer, sunlight shattering over the river's surface, bougainvilleas spilling from the balconies of old brick houses, and laughter echoing once again along the cobblestone streets. Inside the 18th floor office of the Bennett Group, Richard sat at his oak desk. Stacks of papers surrounded him, but his attention was elsewhere. His eyes rested on an envelope placed neatly before him. In the top left corner, written in a simple, slanted hand, "From Amber Collins." He picked it up and gently lifted the flap. Inside was a short, handwritten note, the kind that trembles slightly as if written through tears. "Dear Mr. Bennett, I got the job. Harborview accepted me. With the help of your foundation, I found a small apartment near the daycare. Ella just turned 11 months last week. She's starting to stand now." Richard paused. A faint smile curved at the corner of his lips. He touched the small photograph tucked inside. Little Ella, with wisps of golden hair, sitting in her mother's arms, smiling as bright as morning sunlight. He continued reading. "I'm also taking night classes for nursing. Life isn't easy yet, but it's steady. You showed me that asking for help isn't a weakness. It's a sign of hope. You reminded me that there are still people in this world who see others as family, not strangers. One day, I'll pass it on. Not just the kindness, but the faith you placed in me. By the time he reached the last line, Richard's eyes had blurred. He set the letter down and leaned back in his chair, feeling something rise quietly within him. Something he hadn't felt in a long time. Gratitude. He opened the drawer beside him and took out an old photograph. Ellen, smiling in the lavender garden behind their house, her eyes bright as though they could still see across time. He placed Amber's letter beside it, carefully aligned, and whispered, "Ellen, you were right. A second chance doesn't just belong to the one who receives it. It also belongs to the one who gives." Outside, the sunlight slanted through the window, spilling across the room. He stood and walked to the glass, looking down at the city alive with movement. Somewhere out there, the young mother was rebuilding her life from the kindness she'd been shown. And here, in this quiet office, a lonely man had finally found himself again. That evening, Richard called his daughter Grace, who now lived with her family in Nashville. "Sweetheart," he said as a child's voice echoed faintly on the other end, "I just read a letter. It made me think of your mother."
About Mom?
Grace asked softly. "Yes. Do you remember what she used to say? Everyone deserves a second chance."
I do. She always said that.
"I think." Richard paused, smiling faintly. "Your mother would have added one more thing."
What's that, Dad?
That sometimes, when we give someone else a second chance, we're really giving ourselves one too. A chance to love again, to trust again, to begin again. There was silence on the line, then Grace's quiet reply. "I think Mom would be smiling if she heard you say that." Richard turned toward the window. Charleston shimmered beneath the golden glow of the city lights, their reflections dancing across the river like 1,000 stars. And for the first time in 2 years, he felt light, as though someone had gently lifted the weight from his heart. Outside, the night breeze carried the scent of salt and the faint whisper of rain, brushing against memory. Just an ordinary evening. Just a brief encounter. But somehow, it had tied 2 lives together, with nothing but a single thread of kindness. And somewhere, in the stillness of the Charleston night, perhaps Ellen was smiling. Because sometimes, miracles don't come from grand gestures. They begin with a half-finished meal, a small trembling question. "May I have your leftovers, sir?" And a heart open enough to listen. Remember this: kindness doesn't just change one life. It changes many. Sometimes, it saves the one who gives it away. If this story made your heart slow down for just one beat, please share it with someone who needs to be reminded that kindness still exists. Like, comment, and subscribe, and join us in telling more true stories that touch the most beautiful part of who we are.